Hello from CBC Montreal. I'm Deborah Arbeck. Thank you for joining us. It is a big day for Quebec at the Supreme Court of Canada. Now, judges will begin hearing the legal challenge to Quebec's secularism law, Bill 21. Now, that is the law that bans some civil servants, including teachers, from wearing religious symbols at work. But the case will have implications that go well beyond Bill 21 in Quebec. Steve Rukavina is following the case for us at the Supreme Court. And Steve, I know that there was a scrum earlier from some of the challengers. Walk us through what just happened and what we can expect through the day.
Well, this kicks off 4 days of hearings here at the Supreme Court. So we're going to hear later today from opponents of Bill 21, and also the Quebec government will eventually have a chance to defend the law in court. And the court will also hear from the federal government, from other provinces, and interveners from across the country. Now, today, as I mentioned, it is the challengers who are directly challenging Bill 21 in court. That includes the English Montreal School Board, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and some of these groups spoke earlier to the media, including the National Council of Canadian Muslims.
The stakes couldn't be higher. The decision that the Supreme Court justices will render on Bill 21 will in large part determine whether Canada continues to be a liberal democracy that is the envy of the world, or something less, something that we cannot afford to accept. By promising to preemptively use the extraordinary powers of the notwithstanding clause in the federal charter, the CAQ demonstrated that government could simply disregard the fundamental freedoms of our own citizens in a way that could be politically advantageous. And as one would expect, this has had both disastrous and predictable consequences.
Now, beyond Bill 21, these hearings will also put the Constitution's notwithstanding clause to the test. So how did we get here, Steve?
Well, we got to go back to 2019. That's when Bill 21 was passed. It was controversial from the start. The CAQ government had always defended it, saying it was a consensus compromise on the issue of religious accommodation, which it viewed as a problem. But the groups challenging the law have always maintained that it's an attack, an assault on fundamental freedoms. Now, the law has so far survived lower court challenges, and lower court judges have conceded that the law violates some charter rights, but they've said that Quebec is allowed to do that under the Constitution because of what we heard Stephen Brown mention there, the constitutional notwithstanding clause.
And what are some of the arguments we can expect?
Well, it really will be a debate about how Quebec used the notwithstanding clause in this case and how other provinces will use it in the future. Because Quebec did something different when drafting Bill 21. Traditionally, if you had a controversial law in a province, the province would pass the law, groups would challenge it in court, judges would strike it down saying it violates charter rights, and then at that point, governments would invoke the notwithstanding clause, which allows them to suspend those rights for a renewable period of up to 5 years. What Quebec did with Bill 21 is bake that notwithstanding clause into the law right from the start, writing it into the legislation in the hopes of preventing court challenges. The opponents of Bill 21 say the clause was never meant to be used that way. Quebec's defense has basically been, it doesn't say in the Constitution anywhere that we can't do this, so we're going to do that. And so far, that has worked in lower courts.
Yeah, and as Stephen Brown said, the stakes are enormous here, Steve, here in Quebec, but it's also affecting other provinces. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, obviously the people most affected by this are teachers in Quebec. One of them who's challenging the law is an English teacher from Montreal. Her name is Bushra Chelby. Now, she didn't lose her job when Bill 21 was passed because there's an acquired rights clause, which meant if you were wearing a religious symbol at the time the law was passed, you could keep your job. But that clause has pretty strict limits.
I am greatly impacted in the sense that I wanted to go back to uni and study to be a principal, but this limits my freedom of choice. I cannot choose to have any a higher position. I can only be a teacher until I retired, in fact.
So teachers most directly affected by this, but we have to remember that since Bill 21, Quebec has used the notwithstanding clause preemptively to draft other secularism laws, such as Bill 94 passed last fall, which expands that religious symbols ban to all school workers. So we know in recent weeks, dozens of lunchtime and after school monitors have been laid off of their jobs. So they're watching this court case as well. And there's another secularism law in the works, Bill 9, not passed yet, but it would expand the religious symbols ban to include public daycare workers. So they'll be watching this. It's not just secularism laws. Quebec used the notwithstanding clause preemptively in its language law, Bill 96. So that will be affected by the outcome of this case. And it's not even just Quebec. We go beyond Quebec. Alberta and Saskatchewan have tried to do the same thing with the notwithstanding clause to limit the rights of trans people. Alberta and Ontario have tried to do it to limit the rights of striking workers. One legal expert I spoke to said that there are huge implications from this case from coast to coast to coast.
Now, at 4 days, these are going to be exceptionally long hearings, Steve. They usually last, what, a day or two? So why so long, and what will be happening over the next 4 days?
Well, it's so long simply because of the exceptional nature of this case and the fact that it will have such an effect on so many different laws in different provinces. So today we'll hear from the opponents of Bill 21. Tomorrow it'll be the Quebec government and pro-secularism groups getting to make their legal arguments. Wednesday, the federal government will weigh in and attorneys general from 6 different provinces. And then it's all those other interveners, religious groups, women's groups, legal groups, civil rights groups. They'll each get 5 minutes to have their say for the rest of the week. And then we wait for a decision. And that'll be at least several months before we get that.
All right, some time to wait still then. Thank you very much, Steve. That was Steve's Rukavina as 4 days of hearings on Quebec's Bill 21 get underway at Canada's highest court. And you can follow our story on the legal challenge as it develops right here and on our live page on CBCNews.ca/Montreal. I am Deborah Arbeck in Montreal. Thanks for watching.